A guilty verdict in the Bridgegate trial. We are live at the courthouse and we take a look at what is next for Bridget Kelly, Bill Baroni, and also what this means for the governor, Christie. And then we are in the home stretch finally for the election. We take a look at the latest polls, the strategies, and who has the real momentum. And also, we will switch gears to sports. Millions turning out for a parade for the Chicago Cubs, 108 years in the making, and how a rock and roll legend paying tribute to the team that just won their first series in more than a lifetime. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I am Richard French. We're going to start with Bridgegate, of course, and the guilty verdicts that came down earlier today against former Port Authority official Bill Baroni and former top Christie aide Bridget Kelly. Well, Governor Christie, he wasted no time washing his hands of the whole thing, his office issuing the following statement just minutes after the verdict was read, reading in part, quote, "I am saddened by the case, and I am saddened about the choices made by Bill Baroni, Bridget Kelly, and David Wildstein. Today's verdict does not change this for me, but let me be clear once again, I had no knowledge prior to or during these lane realignments and had no role in authorizing them. No believable evidence was presented to contradict that fact." Well, the paper of record, if you will, in northern New Jersey immediately pounced on Christie's statements and posted this editorial, and I'll read you the headline from it. Criminals, 4 top aides now guilty of federal charges, and here's a portion of what was written below. Baroni, Kelly, Wildstein, and Sampson. Christie is saddened. We are just sick. We question how he can continue in his elected office. We question how the people of New Jersey can have any faith in his appointees and staff. New Jersey is not a constituency of one. There are nearly 9 million constituents. The governor's behavior, which to date has not resulted in a criminal charge, has been shown as despicable. And as I said, we've been covering this all day since it broke early or late this morning here. And I want to go to Files One's Kim Walls, who's been there for the better part of 7 weeks since this trial began. She's live at the courthouse in Newark with more. Kim?
That's right, Rich. It's been 3 years of allegations and investigations, a 6-week trial followed by 5 days of jury deliberations. And for the 2 defendants, it all came down to today for Bill Baroni and Bridget Kelly. And with one word, their fates were sealed: guilty.
I am innocent of these charges, and I am very, very looking forward to this appeal.
Kelly became emotional inside the federal courthouse as each count was read, followed by a guilty verdict for all charges she pleaded not guilty to. The 2 former Christie staffers have maintained they thought the 2013 GWB lane closures were for a traffic study, not political payback against the mayor of Fort Lee for not endorsing Governor Christie's re-election campaign, as the government's chief witness, David Wildstein, pleaded guilty to while testifying against his former allies.
I said at the time in my opening and my summation that I felt she was a scapegoat, and I feel now she's a scapegoat.
After the judge answered yes to jury question number 4, asking if the defendants can be guilty of conspiracy without punitive intention, Kelly's attorney Michael Critchley argued it was a decision that opened the door for a guilty verdict.
As we filed previously, the decisions were wrong.
The indictment charged that the defendant's motive was to punish Mayor Sokolich, but the intent was to take the acts that the defendants took to shut down the lanes, to respond to the mayor's pleas for help with radio silence. Those are the intentional acts of the defendants with which they were charged, and the misuse of the Port Authority resources, using those resources for an improper purpose, was the crime with which they are charged.
And both defendants remain free on bail. They are scheduled to return here to the federal courthouse in Newark on February 21st, 2017 for sentencing. But of course, Rich, both the defense attorneys say there is no doubt they plan to appeal. Live in Newark for RFL, Kimberly Wallace, back to you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Let's bring our panel right now. Richard Brodsky is a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman. He struggles with the watch. He's now a senior fellow at Demos and a professor at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author who can teach him a thing or two about being on time. Scott Vanderhoff, always reliable, former 5-term Republican Rockland County exec and co-chairman of the Palisades Institute of Dominican College. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. All right. good for you, Richard. We don't have to defend, I should say, here, the institution of Albany. Now we're talking Trenton here. Okay. Oh, you have so much. Don't even. So let's do the legality first, guys, and then I get into the politics of it. Because early today, when we were doing this, we spoke to several members of the Assembly from both parties, by the way. And there's an interesting dynamic there as to where this goes next, if anywhere, for Christie. But this pivoted some thought with an instruction by the judge earlier in the week as to whether or not they could convict for conspiracy the two defendants, even if they didn't know their actions were harming Mayor Sokolich, the Fort Lee mayor, the town obviously most impacted, and whether there's political payback or not, as most believe, by their action. They said no, they didn't have to know that what they were doing would directly impact them to be guilty of conspiracy. Whether that has grounds for appeal or not, if you listen to the two attorneys for the defendants that were found guilty today, they thought that was significant. Are they parsing words, or do they have a point?
Not a criminal lawyer, but I think they've got a point, because the conspiracy is to take from the Port Authority resources it should not have used and misuse it. Well, if it's for a traffic study, then a traffic study could or could not be, in my view anyway, a proper Port Authority action. So by taking out the intent, that a motive, you weaken your case. And I think the judge, made a mistake in saying that the motive had nothing to do with it in any kind of serious, felonious kind of attack. So I don't know whether it's going to win on appeal, but it seems to me the judge made a mistake.
Richard, the argument, and not the argument, when the U.S. Attorney, Mr. Fishman, came out later and he said, listen, it was clear, and certainly the jury felt it this way, when they saw the thread of emails, time for a little traffic on the GW and all the rest that was there, for all the denials that Baroni and Kelly thought that this was a traffic study, they knew, when you followed the thread here, that there was an intent to do some political harm to those that did not support or endorse Governor Christie. They made it clear, don't give me, you guys thought this was a traffic study. Everybody knew what this was.
Well, there's intent, there's motive, they're legally significant. Not that they're morally or politically significant, but the legal significance that the U.S. Attorney insists on is they intended to make trouble in Fort Lee. They didn't necessarily intend to hurt the mayor. You have to prove they intended to make trouble. You don't have to prove the political intent. That's the parsing
Guilty
of words.
on all nine counts, though. They weren't all for conspiracy. There were also the misuse of the Port Authority.
Again, the conspiracy count versus the misuse of asset charge is legally irrelevant to this issue. Whether you had to prove intention to hurt the mayor, a political intention, or merely an intention to do a traffic study that wasn't justified. They proved the latter, that the traffic study wasn't justified. They didn't try to prove the political intent. Much harder to do. You're asking me whether the trial judge will turn down that legal argument, and then the Second Circuit or the First Circuit, Jersey's in the First Circuit? I don't know. The U.S. Court of Appeals for Jersey will eventually have to decide it.
And I think it is the first,
It's either Aquinian or Talmudic, depending on your upbringing, but it's not shoplifting.
There was a couple of things that came out. This crossed a little bit from the legal, but also into the political. And I got for you guys where this may go from here. But it was pointed out both in that editorial, of which we read in part, but it wasn't just Bridget Kelly, and it wasn't just Bill Baroni. You have Wildstein. He struck a plea deal here, guilty as well. You have Sampson as well. The whole idea of the Christie administration, as he said in 2009, we're going to run the most ethical ship around. I'm a former U.S. attorney. I know how this works here. My guys will be above board. Four of his closest confidants, okay, they've gone down here. Now, whatever happens to appeal, not that it's irrelevant, it's relevant to those people, but it's not irrelevant as to him. When asked afterwards, the attorney that was representing Bill Baroni, and to be fair, the attorney representing Bridget Kelly wouldn't take the bait on it, but this guy did. When asked, how come you and Bridget Kelly, were the ones that were on trial here? And the prosecutor said at the beginning here that the governor, we're going to prove, knew what was going on. Why isn't he here? And he said, without using the words Christie, if any of you think that these guys operate in a vacuum, and they're not just picking off the little fish instead of going after the people who really were responsible for this. You folks are in effect naive. This isn't going to end here, Dominic, is it?
Well, it may end from a court of law. What that defense counsel went on to say, I mean, besides the appellate process, I believe you're asking me as it relates to Christie.
Yep.
What that defense counsel said was that clearly he felt the U.S. attorney did not go after the most powerful person or gave the most powerful person, and he used the word powerful, a pass. Any layperson looking at this, everybody has gone down except for the top dog, the governor. So the question is, if your prosecutors came in court and said that he knew, and defense counsel said he knew, then why wasn't he one of the defendants and let the jury decide it? What was it, the politics of the fact that Christie is a former U.S. attorney and the Justice Department out of Washington didn't want to take on one of their own? Who knows? Is it because they felt that Christie could win, they couldn't prove the case? But it smells awful, Richard.
And there is a case, and I spoke earlier today, Andrew, to Bill Brennan. He's the activist who's brought a case outside of the U.S. attorneys against Chris Christie for basically abuse of power. And it carries a different term of that, but where it is. But let's get to the political remedy, because the Assembly of the Legislature doesn't have to wait for what, in effect, the U.S. attorney or any court of law can do. They could choose to impeach. But there's I've already spoken to Assemblyman Wisniewski and also Loretta Weinberg, who are the two people who ran the respective committees, in Trenton here that have investigated. If they believe that there's no trust left in this governor and there's been abuse of power and he's misrepresented and all the rest here, they've said, we'll wait and see. But the clock, if nothing else, makes this somewhat improbable, and also the politics of this. Do Democrats want someone else in power, right?
What's the impeachable offense?
Well, it would be abuse of office or
What's the abuse of office?
simply allowing the staff to get that far out of control, or
You don't impeach
if
people for
you
that.
follow the argument that Bridget Kelly made in the trial that Christie knew about it at the time, then he lied to the voting public of New Jersey when he went out to the podium and told everybody and swore up and down that he
Stop
didn't.
impeaching people you don't
Well,
like.
Thank you for finishing my sentence for me. The practical problem is that it could take a long time, and by the time you actually do get rid of him, you've got 6 months left in his term anyway. You also
Because remind everybody, he's termed out in November.
Yeah, he's done in January of 18. He'll be, his replacement will be elected next November. You also would at that point elevate Kim Godano, the Lieutenant Governor of New Jersey, to the governor's seat, and then assuming that she's a candidate for governor, she's running as an incumbent, and you don't have the albatross of Chris Christie to hang around the necks, now I'm mixing metaphors, of Republicans all across the state. I think Democrats might actually have a better political future with Chris Christie right in place in his 21%
And I've heard
approval
some
rating.
Republicans say, off the record here, that they'd love to see Christie gone more than anyone else. His approval ratings right now almost at record lows. And you want to talk about fall from grace, Scott. Yeah. My God. And I'm seeing him gloating in the corner over there, Dominic. But it wasn't that long ago where I said, this guy, whatever you think, and I thought he was a bully and everything else, he had that vibe of authenticity, that he'll tell it the way it is. But like every bully here, you keep doing this, you start to believe your own press clippings, and also you make so many enemies, nobody's standing with you, when the other shoe drops, right?
Yeah, it comes down to something very simple. Somebody is lying. Now, do you take the people under oath who could perjure themselves, or you take a governor who keeps releasing the same thing, saying they don't know anything about it? And I never threw a water bottle at Bridget Kelly, and I never did any of these things. And that will continue politically to haunt him. And you know what it always is this. It's the cover-up. It's the cover-up. It's always the guy who says, well, we'll figure out a way to get around this. And the reason they didn't go after the governor is because the issue didn't become a question of motive anymore, where the governor might have been susceptible. The issue became whether, in fact, you conspired to use improperly Port Authority stuff. And the governor was clearly not part of that.
And I just want to put a bow on this. Just think for a second how bad it's gotten for Chris Christie. The Trump campaign in the 11th hour has basically put him to the side, kind of like Uma Abedin is in the Clinton thing in the final hours in the last mad dash to Election Day. I want you to think about the Trump campaign doesn't want to be seen with Christie right now. That's where it's gotten. All right, coming up next, speaking of the presidential campaign, national polls, as you know, tight, but the question is, who has the clearest path to the White House and who is leading when it comes to those pivotal states? We've got to look at some early voting here. We've also got to look at some trends. Presidential race straight ahead.